There are moments in sports media that cut through all the noise, all the hot takes, all the manufactured outrage, all the debate show theater. Yesterday was one of those moments. Stephen A. Smith sat down on First Take, looked directly into the camera, took off his glasses, and did something he almost never does. He called for someone's job, not a coach who blew a playoff series, not a GM who botched a draft, the commissioner of the WNBA. And when you find out exactly what happened behind closed doors at league headquarters, you won't just understand why he said it. You'll be asking why it took this long. Because what we're talking about right now is not another ratings debate. It's not another Olympic roster argument. What we're dealing with is something far more serious, far more calculated, and far more self-destructive than anything this league has ever done before. The WNBA just went to war with the only person keeping their entire operation alive. And they did it in writing, with a formal warning, over something so irrational that when you hear it, you'll need a moment to decide if it's actually real. Let's get into it. Multiple sources with direct knowledge of internal WNBA communications have confirmed that Commissioner Kathy Engelbert's office issued a formal warning to Caitlin Clark. A warning. To the woman who revolutionized women's basketball in this country. The reason? No failed drug test, no conduct violation, no legal trouble, no scandal. Caitlin Clark signed a landmark broadcasting deal with NBC Universal, a deal that makes her one of the most visible female athletes in the history of sports media, and the WNBA called it a conflict of interest. Read that back slowly. The woman who turned half-empty arenas into sold-out events. The woman who dragged the WNBA into ABC primetime slots and billion-dollar media rights negotiations. The woman who put charter flights in the pockets of every veteran player on every roster. She signed a deal to appear on national television, talking about basketball, the sport she plays, on the same network that broadcasts WNBA games. And the commissioner's response was to open her legal team's laptop and start typing. That is where we are right now. And it gets worse from here. Let's be very clear about what this NBC deal actually is, because the conflict of interest argument the league is pushing doesn't survive 5 seconds of scrutiny. Caitlin Clark signed a contract to serve as a broadcaster and on-air analyst for NBC Sports, studio segments, commentary, sideline interviews, basketball analysis during the offseason and major sporting events. She is not playing for another basketball league. She is not endorsing a rival organization. She is not sabotaging anyone. She is sitting in front of a camera, talking about the sport she has dedicated her entire life to, on NBC. The same NBC that broadcasts WNBA games. The same NBC that just signed a historic deal to carry women's basketball into millions of American homes. Think about what actually happens when Caitlin Clark sits at an NBC anchor desk on a Sunday afternoon. Casual sports fans see her face. They hear her voice. They build a connection. And when the WNBA season tips off, those same fans are significantly more likely to tune in, buy tickets, stream games, and purchase jerseys. That is not a conflict of interest. That is textbook marketing. That is the kind of organic brand amplification that advertising agencies charge millions of dollars to manufacture. The WNBA is getting it for free. Because one of their players is compelling enough to earn a national broadcasting platform, and their response is a legal warning. Stephen A. Smith addressed this directly and without hesitation. He made the comparison that needed to be made. Promoting the NBA helps the WNBA. Basketball is basketball. NBC holds broadcasting rights for both leagues. They exist in the same ecosystem. When Caitlin Clark is visible on NBC programming, it doesn't pull attention away from the WNBA. It builds awareness. It creates casual viewers who become invested fans. It does the one thing this league has struggled to do for 3 decades. It makes women's basketball culturally relevant to people who never followed it before. Think about Michael Jordan filming Space Jam in 1996. Did the Chicago Bulls send him cease and desist letters? Did anyone in that organization call an emergency meeting about him starring in a Warner Brothers film? Of course not, because they understood that Jordan's cultural crossover was a net positive. For the franchise, for the NBA, for everyone. Think about LeBron James appearing on TNT broadcasts during the offseason. Did the Lakers ever suggest his media presence created a conflict of interest? The question is almost laughable. Because every serious sports organization understands that their biggest star being a prominent public figure is an asset, not a liability. Every serious organization, except apparently the WNBA. The conflict of interest argument isn't just weak, it's a fiction. It's a legal costume dressed over a decision that has nothing to do with league integrity and everything to do with something far uglier. We'll get there, but first let's talk about the money. Because the financial reality of this situation makes the league's position even more indefensible. Do you know what the WNBA pays Caitlin Clark as a base salary? $76,000, not per game, not per month, per year. $76,000 annually. To to the player who has generated more revenue, more media value, and more cultural relevance for this league than anyone in its entire history. Let that number sit for a second. Because here is the context that makes it even more staggering. NBA mascots, the people in full body foam costumes who shoot t-shirts out of cannons during timeouts, they earn an average of around $600,000 per year. The person in the furry suit dancing at halftime makes roughly 8 times what the WNBA pays its most valuable player. Not just its most valuable player, arguably its only globally recognizable brand asset, and yet, the league office. While paying her a salary that barely clears what many consider a living wage in major American cities, believes it has the moral authority to tell Caitlin Clark she cannot sign an 8-figure broadcasting deal with one of the largest media companies in the world. The audacity required to arrive at that position is genuinely staggering. Put yourself in this scenario for a second. You are working a job that pays you the absolute minimum your employer can legally get away with. You have performed at an extraordinary level. You have brought in clients and revenue the company had never seen before your arrival. You have transformed the organization's reputation and market position entirely. And then one day you land a second opportunity, a massive one, a life-changing contract from a major corporation, for work completely separate from your primary job, work that doesn't compete with your employer. Work that actually increases your visibility and indirectly promotes the very place you work. And your minimum wage employer sends you a letter saying they have a problem with it. What do? You laugh. You fold that letter in half, put it in your back pocket, and walk out the door. That is exactly the position the WNBA has created for themselves. If Commissioner Engelbert wants to enforce exclusivity over Caitlin Clark's outside business ventures, if she wants to claim the league has a legitimate stake in her commercial activities beyond basketball, then she needs to write a check that actually reflects that level of control. Put $50 million guaranteed on the table. Build a contract that represents what Caitlin Clark is actually worth as a commercial entity. Negotiate in good faith with a player who has delivered value that the league's entire history couldn't match. Then maybe, you have some moral standing to have a conversation about outside employment. But for $76,000 a year, you sit down, you say thank you, and you get out of her way. The NBC deal doesn't just pay Caitlin more than the WNBA does, it pays her more in a single broadcast weekend than the league will pay her across multiple entire seasons. Multiple years of professional basketball, traveling, grinding, absorbing every piece of physical punishment the sport demands. Versus walking into an NBC studio, putting on a blazer, and talking about the game she knows better than almost anyone alive, and the WNBA wants to threaten her over the second option, while paying her wages that a first-year teacher in a rural school district would consider inadequate. This is not a conflict of interest. This is a league that still does not understand its own business, and the warning they issued is the proof. When Stephen A. Smith breaks from his usual role of provocateur and delivers a verdict with genuine conviction, people in sports pay attention. Not because everyone agrees with him, not because he's always right, but because when something cuts through the noise loudly enough to move him from debate to declaration, it usually means a line has been crossed that serious sports observers cannot ignore. Yesterday on First Take, he crossed that line. He took off his glasses, looked into the camera, and said what needed to be said. He called the WNBA's warning to Caitlin Clark blasphemous. He said it reeks of jealousy. He said Commissioner Engelbert should be sending Caitlin flowers and gratitude, not legal warnings. And then he went further. He didn't just criticize the decision, he called for the commissioner's resignation, publicly, on one of the most watched sports programs in the country. That is not a hot take designed to generate clicks before the commercial break. That is one of the most prominent voices in sports media drawing a clear line and saying this leadership has failed beyond redemption. But Smith touched on something that deserves even deeper examination. He didn't just go after the commissioner. He pointed the lens directly at the veteran players. He said they need to look in the mirror. And he was right, because here is the truth that the formal warning is deliberately obscuring. This warning did not originate in a boardroom strategy session. It did not come from executives reviewing broadcasting agreements and identifying genuine organizational conflicts. It came from the locker room. Veteran players have been whispering in Kathy Engelbert's ear for months, applying pressure that she ultimately wasn't strong enough to resist. And to understand that resentment, you have to understand the history these players are carrying. These veterans spent years, in some cases more than a decade, grinding in almost total obscurity. Flying commercial to road games, sharing hotel rooms to cut costs, playing overseas during the off-season, sometimes in places like Russia, thousands of miles from home just to make ends meet. They fought for every inch of recognition this league received. They carried the WNBA through years when arenas were half full and TV ratings were an afterthought. They invested their entire professional lives into a league that paid them modestly and asked them to be grateful for the opportunity. And then Caitlin Clark arrived. In 12 months, everything changed. Charter flights became standard. Primetime slots appeared on network television. Endorsement deals that veteran players couldn't have dreamed of began materializing. Arena attendance records shattered. The league negotiated a media rights deal worth exponentially more than anything in WNBA history. The conditions these veterans had fought for loudly, publicly, desperately, suddenly existed. Not because their decade of advocacy finally broke through, because a 22-year-old rookie put on a jersey and the business case became undeniable overnight. The resentment that produces is not rational, it is not logical, but it is also not surprising. When you have given everything to something for years and someone arrives and accomplishes more in months than you did in a decade, it stings in ways that are genuinely difficult to process. But none of that complexity changes what these veteran players have actually been doing. They have been lobbying the commissioner to humble Caitlin Clark, pressuring league leadership to remind her that she is a rookie who hasn't earned the treatment her profile is generating. They want the league to level the playing field, not by lifting everyone up, but by pulling the most valuable player in women's basketball down to a level that feels more comfortable to people who feel they were never given what they deserved. And instead of being a leader, instead of recognizing that her job is to build the business and not manage the emotional temperature of resentful veterans, Kathy Engelbert gave them exactly what they wanted. She picked up her pen, signed the warning letter, and handed the most self-destructive document in WNBA history to a player who could walk out the door tomorrow and never need this league again. Stephen A. Smith said it plainly. These veterans should not be asking why Caitlin got the NBC deal. They should be asking what they can do to position themselves for similar opportunities. Because the salary cap increases, the charter flights, the media coverage, the sponsorship dollars. None of it exists without Caitlin Clark being exactly who she is. Trying to diminish her doesn't protect what the veterans built. It dismantles the foundation that makes any of it possible going forward. Now let's talk about the legal dimension of this warning, because this is where the WNBA's position doesn't just look bad, it collapses entirely. And the collapse happens fast. NBC Universal is owned by Comcast, one of the largest and most powerful media conglomerates on the planet. Their legal department doesn't operate on a WNBA budget. Their legal department operates on a budget that makes the WNBA's entire salary cap look like a rounding error. The team of attorneys Comcast employs to protect their broadcasting agreements and talent contracts represents resources so overwhelming that the WNBA engaging them in litigation would be the institutional equivalent of a little league team challenging a major league franchise. It is not a fair fight. It is not even close to a fair fight. The outcome is decided before anyone walks into a courtroom. But let's engage the legal argument on its own terms anyway. Caitlin Clark's standard WNBA player contract almost certainly does not prohibit outside employment, especially outside employment in a field as distinct from competitive basketball as television broadcasting. She is not playing for another basketball league. She is not joining a rival organization. She is not appearing in campaigns for companies that compete with WNBA sponsors. She is walking into an NBC studio and providing sports commentary. The kind of work that countless professional athletes in every sport do during their off-season without anyone suggesting it creates an ethical problem. And here is the specific absurdity of the conflict of interest claim. NBC airs WNBA games. NBC has a broadcasting partnership with the league. NBC's investment in women's basketball is part of what funds the league's operations and makes its expansion possible. If Caitlin Clark being associated with NBC creates a conflict of interest for the WNBA, then the WNBA's entire broadcasting arrangement is a conflict of interest. The logic doesn't work, it's circular, it's tissue paper stretched over a framework that has no real structure. Any lawyer worth their retainer fee would dismantle this argument in an afternoon. What the league is actually testing here isn't a legal theory, it's a power dynamic. They are issuing a warning to see if she will comply, to see if the threat of institutional consequences is enough to make her step back and defer to the organization's authority. They are betting she won't want the confrontation. They are betting she will prioritize keeping peace with the league over pursuing the business opportunities her talent has made available. It is an intimidation play, and it is a particularly bad one. Because the person they are trying to intimidate has options they clearly haven't fully reckoned with. But here is something the WNBA's legal team should have put at the very top of their threat assessment before any warning was ever drafted. The sponsors are watching, not passively, not with polite interest, with the intense calculating attention of corporations that have written very large checks based on a specific value proposition. And who will act decisively the moment that value proposition is threatened? State Farm, Gatorade, Nike, Wilson. These are not small regional partners running banner ads at halftime. These are global brands that have invested millions of dollars in Caitlin Clark specifically. Because her visibility, her likability, her crossover cultural appeal makes their marketing dollars go further. They didn't sign deals with the WNBA and get Caitlin as a bonus. They signed deals because Caitlin exists in the WNBA's ecosystem, and her star power is the engine driving the value they are purchasing. That distinction matters enormously when you think about what happens if the league decides to take action against her. These sponsors are not loyal to the WNBA as an institution. They are loyal to return on investment. They are loyal to the relationship between their brand and the audiences they are trying to reach. And the audience they are reaching through their Caitlin Clark partnerships isn't the core WNBA fan base that has followed the league for years. It is the massive casual sports audience that Caitlin brought in. People who never watched a WNBA game but tuned in because she made them care. If the WNBA takes action against Caitlin that damages her relationship with fans, that undermines her public profile. That turns her story from one of breakthrough and success into one of institutional conflict and suppression. Those sponsors will pick up the phone, and the call will not be a polite one. It will be an ultimatum: fix this immediately, or we redirect our dollars. Stephen A. Smith captured the danger precisely. You are playing with fire and you are covered in gasoline. The people who hold the financial power in this situation are not the league office. They are not the commissioner. They are the corporations that fund the entire ecosystem. And they are aligned with Caitlin, not with the bureaucracy trying to constrain her. The league has spent a decade being commercially fragile, dependent on NBA subsidies, scraping for media deals, fighting for relevance in a sports landscape that wasn't paying attention. Now, for the first time, real corporate money has arrived. Real sponsors with real marketing budgets have shown up. And the reason they showed up is sitting in an NBC studio preparing for her broadcasting debut. If you chase her away, or even create enough conflict that her sponsors decide the association is more trouble than it's worth, you don't just lose Caitlin Clark. You lose the commercial moment that was finally going to make this league financially self-sustaining. You lose everything. Here is the most uncomfortable truth in this entire situation. The truth that makes the commissioner's warning not just bad strategy, but genuinely delusional strategy. Caitlin Clark does not need the WNBA, not in any meaningful sense, not in any way that changes her financial future, her professional legacy, or her life trajectory. The WNBA needs her with a desperation that borders on existential. And the formal warning issued by the commissioner's office represents a catastrophic failure to understand that fundamental power dynamic. Consider the options available to Caitlin Clark right now, at this exact moment. Independent of anything the WNBA decides to do, she could join the unrivaled league, the new women's basketball property specifically designed to treat players like the professionals they are, with competitive salaries and modern organizational infrastructure. She could sign with a European club that would pay her what she is actually worth on the open market, without the baggage of institutional resentment and league politics. She could retire from professional basketball entirely and pursue broadcasting full-time, which the NBC deal suggests would be an enormously successful career path that keeps her in the sports conversation indefinitely. She has options, real options. Financially viable, professionally fulfilling options that don't require her to accept $76,000 a year, while a league office tells her what she can and cannot do with her time. Now consider what happens to the WNBA if she takes any one of those options. The charter flights go away. The ABC primetime slots disappear. The billion-dollar media rights deals negotiated in Caitlin Clark's presence get renegotiated in her absence, and the numbers look very different. Merchandise sales collapse. Casual fans who tuned in because of her stop watching. Sponsors who finally arrived because the value proposition was compelling enough stop writing checks. Attendance drops back to what it was before she arrived. Without Caitlin Clark, the WNBA goes back to being what it was before she showed up. A league with passionate fans, talented athletes, and a perpetual struggle to convince mainstream American sports audiences to pay attention. The commissioner's office is holding a warning letter directed at the only person standing between the WNBA and its previous version of itself. And somehow they think that is a position of institutional strength. It is not. So where does this go from here? What is the actual endgame when a league that needs its star player more than she needs them decides to go to war with her anyway? The math is brutal. And it leads to a conclusion the commissioner's office should have reached before any warning was ever drafted. The WNBA has two choices. Neither one is good. Option 1, they follow through, they escalate, they attempt to find Caitlin Clark or formally block her NBC appearances. What happens next? The broader audience revolts. Casual fans make the simple calculation that a product treating its most compelling figure this way is not worth their time or money. League pass cancellations happen. Ticket sales drop. Merchandise stops moving, sponsors make their calls, and the WNBA discovers what it feels like to lose commercial momentum in real time. Option 2, they back down, they quietly shelve the warning, they issue some vague statement about respecting players outside business opportunities. What happens next? The veteran players who lobbied for this feel betrayed. The commissioner looks weak in front of the very locker room she was trying to appease. The institutional authority the warning was meant to assert evaporates completely. And every player in the league now understands that the commissioner's office will threaten and then retreat when threatened in return. It is a lose-lose scenario, entirely of their own making. What Caitlin Clark will almost certainly do is exactly what her competitive profile suggests she will do. She is not going to comply quietly. She is not going to defer to an authority she has good reason to believe is acting in bad faith. She is going to show up on NBC. She is going to hold that microphone. She is going to sit at that anchor desk and look into the camera and be exactly who she is, on one of the largest broadcasting platforms in the country, and she is going to dare the league to do something about it, not provocatively, not as a stunt, because that is what the contract she signed says she is going to do. And because she knows and her legal team knows that this warning does not have the teeth it is pretending to have, the league's bluff is being called, and everyone watching can see it. Here is where we land after all of it. The formal warning issued to Caitlin Clark is the most revealing document in WNBA history, not because of the legal language on the surface, but because of what it reveals about the people who wrote it and the institutional culture they represent. It reveals a commissioner more interested in managing the emotional comfort of resentful veteran players than in building the business she was hired to run. It reveals a league office that still doesn't understand the difference between the period before Caitlin Clark arrived and the period after. It reveals an organization that has been handed an extraordinary gift, a once-in-a-generation commercial opportunity, and responded by trying to control it, constrain it, and remind it of its place. Stephen A. Smith called for the commissioner's resignation, and he is right. Not because this gets fixed by swapping one executive for another, but because the decision to issue this warning signals a fundamental misalignment between the leader the WNBA has and the leader the WNBA desperately needs. The league needs someone who wakes up every morning thinking about how to protect, amplify, and build around the greatest thing that has ever happened to women's professional basketball in this country. Instead, they have someone who sent a warning letter. The gap between those two things is not manageable. It is disqualifying. Caitlin Clark is going to be fine. Her career trajectory, whether it runs through the WNBA, through NBC, through Unrivaled, or through some combination of all three, will be defined by her talent, her work ethic, and the genuine connection she has built with sports audiences across this country. None of that is going away because a league commissioner is feeling pressure from the locker room. The warning doesn't change what she is worth. It doesn't change what NBC sees in her. It doesn't change what State Farm and Nike and Gatorade are willing to pay for her association with their brands. It changes nothing about her future. It changes everything about the legs. The real warning in this story is not the one the WNBA sent to Caitlin Clark. The real warning is the one the universe is sending to the WNBA. Get out of her way, build around her, protect her, celebrate her, say thank you in public and mean it in private, because this moment, this specific irreplaceable commercial moment, is not guaranteed to last. Stars don't stay forever. Opportunities don't wait. And if you spend the greatest era in the history of your league writing legal threats to the person responsible for it, history will remember you as the leadership team that had everything and threw it all away. Commissioner Engelbert has a decision to make, and the clock on making it wisely is running out faster than she probably realizes. The warning has been issued. Now we wait to see who was really being warned.